Let's talk about motherly love, fatherly love, and other types of things that people call love. I think if we're to distinguish motherly love from fatherly love, we're going to say that motherly love is more protective, anxious, worried. Fatherly love is more challenging. And fatherly love, I think, when we look at the perversions of these two roles or archetypes, motherly love becomes spoiling the child to the point where you're not actually helping the child, where it's not love in an outward, energetic transference or spreading or growth, but it's this kind of encapsulation, entrapment, burying someone, and through a lightness of gravity, through a leniency, creating weakness, which is self-destructive. On the fatherly side of things, the perversion of that would be like the man who wants his son to be the football player, and he's pushing him to be the football player in a way that's ridiculous. So we can see how these things become selfish. We can see how the perversion of motherly love is where you are coddling someone in this victimary way, so much so that sometimes you say the bigotry of low expectations. Well, you can see on an interpersonal level, an individual level, how people can coddle others, oftentimes with like a drug addiction or something. Sometimes we call these people codependent. Sometimes we call these people enablers. People who have no standards. Their concept of love is, I just do whatever the person wants. Right or wrong, I just do what they want. They want ice cream for breakfast, we're having ice cream for breakfast. So, on the fatherly side, it is, you are going to do whatever the ridiculous thing. You're going to meet my expectation. And if you don't, then everything is contingent. We hear stories about people being thrown out of the house. If you don't meet my expectation, I'll kick you out of the house. So, the ideal is that we have a kind of selflessness in love that prevents us from going down these paths. That when we want to protect people and we want what's best for people, we don't go so far as to spoil them or coddle them or to tell them that everything they're doing is right. And this can be taken inwardly in the sense of self-love that's promoted so much today by the mainstream billionaire media. Self-love shouldn't mean accepting every little part of you. Self-love should be about protecting what's good in you, recognizing the good, promoting the good, but not allowing the bad to fester and not allowing the bad to, it would be like, you've got bed bugs or something, or you've got some part of you, you've got cancer, you've got some issue, you don't allow that to fester. You act against it. On the fatherly side of things, there's a type of self-criticism that becomes self-destructive, where we hold ourselves to a certain standard, and rather than someone else kicking us out, we kind of reject ourselves. And we sever that tie, we sever that connection to ourselves, the desire to see growth, the desire to see health. A fatherly love, as well as motherly love, they should have patience. They should be able to, people, as animals, we take a very long time to develop. We take a very long time to mature. We are K-selective as a species. So you need that patience to say, whatever the standard is, if the standard is failed, you don't throw up your hands, you don't give up, you don't say, okay, well, that's the end of it. But you continue, you persevere. So these two concepts of love, it's confusing because the way that we use love, and it's confused with desire. And it's interesting the way in which we've shifted over time in terms of, if we're going to talk about this as a gender relation, about our concept of popularity and to be liked rather than to be loved, and our concept of intimacy, our concept of fame, our desire, our relation to other people. How do we want to relate to other people? Social media has put the world in your pocket. And that's a very unusual psychological incentive compared to, the pre-internet age. It's a very strange and powerful, and in some ways you could say perverse incentive that promotes this kind of thinking that doesn't even rely upon actualization, because we see it all around us. And there's an anticipatory suspense where most people are never going to be famous, but our concept of fame, the popularity of popularity, we related to these things differently in the past. The concept of a national celebrity was not the same in the past as it was in the present, or as it is in the present. And the mechanisms by which you would achieve that are different. In the past, when warrior culture was more dominant, a person might be a national hero because of a war. You think of President Eisenhower, you think of FDR, you think even of, in a sense, you could say JFK in the space race. It was a type of a wartime president. Even as recently as George Bush, when he had 90% approval rating for a short time. But in dominant warrior cultures, or cultures where the warrior class is strong, many times the concept of national heroism, and therefore of that sense of popularity, or the equivalent or the parallel, I'm not even sure if the term popularity really is applicable to the past. But to the extent that it did exist, it existed oftentimes through the warrior class. Now, with prophets, people like Martin Luther, through a process of history, became national heroes. Martin Luther. In Iran, you have that Sufi mystic Rumi could be considered a national hero of Iran. Not a warrior, but a poet. Homer could be considered a hero of the Greeks, or a celebrity. Again, these words are very modern, so it's when we apply them to history, it doesn't entirely fit. But we can think of Homer, we can think of Virgil for the Romans, we can think of Ovid. So we can think of people who were not warriors, who were famous. We can also think in the Roman period of people like Crassus and Pompey and even Caesar, people who were fabulously wealthy. Now, all of those people I just mentioned were also generals. They also led militaries. So they could not be said to be entirely mercantile. But it's hard for me to imagine, when we look back at medieval European history, for example, there's certain banking families. I'm thinking of early Catholic in like Austria in like the 1400s or 1500s, some of these early banking families that would work with the Habsburgs, or, you always had, mercantile classes and people who were in trade and people who were in the business of usury throughout Rome, throughout medieval Europe, and throughout the world. But I can't think of these people as being national heroes. And it's still not necessarily the case today that the CEO of a bank is a national hero. It's not the case today that billionaires are necessarily national heroes. But we're sort of tending more in that direction with people like Trump, with the presidential campaign of Michael Bloomberg, which I still think will have lasting effects into the future, even though it was quite short-lived. I'm thinking of Mark Cuban and his parallels with Donald Trump as a billionaire, as a reality TV show guy, and his Shark Tank and the ratings that they got. So we're thinking about the changing nature of popularity, of celebrity, of fame, and the difference in class orientation that comes with that. And the different concept of to be loved by the masses. And what that love means and where we derive that love and what the purpose of that love is and the orientation of it, the foundation of it, the superficiality of it. Do people love a wartime hero? Do people love a celebrity? I think people really do love, and there is a very genuine love for musicians and artists and poets that goes back quite a long time. People who can speak to the ethos of a culture, people who can speak to the heart of a culture. That's very precious to people. Over time, we've seen maybe the democratization in some ways of the effusive and ecstatic, and you could even say Dionysian celebrations and rituals of those who are artists, and maybe that's reflective of the changing nature of art. I can't imagine, well, maybe I would be wrong. Maybe if Homer entered into a Greek city, there would be all kinds of fanfare and twerking, and, maybe people would be going crazy. They'd be taking forest mushrooms and whatever hashish or whatever ancient things they had at the time, fermented, I don't know, rat brains or whatever was available. I don't know what they did. But, perhaps those kind of Dionysian ecstasies where we are naive to suggest that they only exist in the present, that they never existed in the past. But certainly the internet does change and create a synthetic representation of that. Meaning that if you have a celebrity, let's say, theoretically, some sort of bacchanalian, triumph or parade or orgy or something of the ancient past, and then we have the parallels in the present. We saw the 1960s and the Beatles and Elvis and all of this in the mosh pit, and the concert and the, what do they call them? Not Rococo. I'm thinking of, these different musical festivals and things and raves and clubs and all of these things. And we say, okay, well, yes, things have changed over time and there's different class orientations, but, this kind of mass civilizational societal ritual, which maybe even has tribal origins, this is just kind of perennial to the human species. But what the internet does is it takes away the physicality and the intimacy and the presence between those who are famous and those who are their fans. It creates a dislocation and an abstraction where fame is no longer felt in the same way, neither for the famous nor for the fan. And I think it's interesting to see these Trump rallies happening as a modern phenomenon, which, you could say, other than, I guess, sort of, what do we call them, restrictions that are going on. Otherwise, you would have concerts and all of that continuing as normal. but we have these restrictions. And so these Trump rallies sort of stand out alone as these social gatherings of cheering fans, and you have that physical presence. We don't yet have this science fiction world where people go into a coliseum and there's a giant face on a screen. We don't yet quite have that, although I think there have been things like that, a WWE wrestling match or something. I think they do use the giant television screens at sporting events, but still, it's not that the players are completely absent, but that they are enlarged by technology. But there's still some kind of physical proximity. And with the internet, I'm thinking of social media, and I'm thinking of the way in which even the movie theater, I guess, could be viewed as a counterpoint to what I was just saying, that people go to a movie theater, like a Star Wars film, and they cheer for the star. I don't know how much this happens anymore. I know the original Star Wars films, when movies were new and fresh and original and creative, and it was the cutting edge of that medium, in the same way, when people were first painting expressionist paintings, it was like fire. It was like a burst of energy. Now, if you paint an impressionist painting today, no one cares. In the same way, when film was a new medium, people would cheer, they would clap at the end of a movie. So there was this dislocation between the actors and the fans, in a way that, like the theater, where you have actors on a stage, they have that physical proximity, that physical connection that you don't have at a movie theater. And people were excited, and they did engage in the simulacra of pretending or feeling proximity to the screen. And I think over time that's worn off, and we've grown cold to that. And now we're not even going to the movie theater. And so it's not just that the fans and the famous are disconnected, but that the fans themselves are disconnected. At least when you go to a movie theater, even if you'll never meet the actors and you're totally separate from them, and there's this, this veil, it's almost like they're gods or something, you at least have that connection to the fans. Now we don't even have that. Now we're streaming from home. And maybe some people think it's going to go back to normal. I'm skeptical about that. I'm skeptical that it's going to go back to normal. I think it's been trending this way for a long time, regardless of recent restrictions. I think it's been trending this way, and this is just, it's almost like you're driving a car and you're going 20 miles an hour down a bumpy road, and then all of a sudden someone slams on the gas. And you just go flying, and people are like, whoa, this is crazy. Like, we have to slow down. We have to turn around. And the truth is, yeah, we might go back to 20 miles an hour, but we're still headed toward the same destination. It's almost like people are like, we're going to get there anyway. It's time to just hit the turbo on this thing. That's really all that recent crises have done, is they've just accelerated recent trends. They haven't actually created a fundamental change or reversal of any kind of social or cultural development, which in a sense makes them quite boring in their predictability. For those people who understand them, as I believe they should be understood. So, what is the consequence of this? What is the consequence of the fact that there's this growing gap, not just between the famous and the fans, but the fans themselves? Well, I think it relates to what I'm saying about love. The difference between a kind of, and maybe there's a better word for selfish love, some kind of Greek word, desire, cupidinous love, I don't know. Choose your pick. Infatuation. But there's a kind of selfish love which thinks about the relation between the fan and the famous, or the lover and the loved, in terms of subject and object, rather than subject and subject. And so it's this selfish thing of like, I want to feel like a good parent, so I'm going to spoil my children because it makes me feel good. Not because it's the right thing to do, not because it's going to make them a good person, not because it's really what's best for them, but because it makes me feel good. And so spoiling a kid, that perversion of motherly love, that is a selfish form of love. And by the same token, the perversion of fatherly love, where it's this harsh expectation and there's no patience and there's no forgiveness, and it's just like this merciless, like, you need to be this way, and if you're this way, I'll love you, and if you're not, then I won't. That's all. We can see the selfishness in that. And so I think what we're seeing as we decrease the distance between the famous and the fans and each other, is we're making it harder to have intimate and selfless love. It's making it harder for us to conceptualize other people as subjects, and it's becoming easier to objectify other people. It's becoming easier to think of other people as objects. Now, the counter to this would be the idea that people are in fact so alienated, not just through the vector of fans to the famous, through the vector of entertainment, through the vector of art and media, whatever, but people are alienated in their workplace. People are alienated from their families. People are alienated from their neighbors. And so, while normally what I've just said would seem true in isolation, if we put that in the context of people are just losing connection and conception of subjectivity, of outward subjectivity, not the inward, but the outward subjectivity, that there are other people and we should care about them, we should think about them, we should pray for them. We're losing that in general. And so in a sense, even while the distance between the famous and the fans and each other, that is decreasing, or the distance is increasing, the intimacy is decreasing, as that process is even happening, people are... It's almost like you've got two objects falling, the feather and the stone. Which falls faster? Well, in fact, the feather has more drag on it than the stone, so the feather does in fact fall slower. We don't live in zero air resistance in this physical model. So essentially it's almost like, if you think about it in this way, if you think about the idea, and I don't think this is true for everyone, but I think we're starting to see subcultures form, like the K-pop subculture. It's my perspective, and I haven't met too many K-pop fans in real life, which is kind of why I suspect this to be true. Because if I in my normal day-to-day life, I encountered someone and they're like, yeah, I'm a quirky K-pop fan. I go on the internet and I post K-pop GIFs, and I'm part of the K-pop community. And they seemed like a normal enough or whatever, standard, everyday person. It's okay, that's weird, but, you're still connected to reality. But the fact is, I almost never meet these people in real life, and yet they're all over the internet. So they're these heavily internet people. And so what I'm thinking is, while it may be the case for that, some people might feel that, okay, well, I can't go to a movie theater, I can't go to a regular theater, I can't meet famous people. What do I care about the internet? What do I care about all this celebrity stuff? I'm going to reject all that because it's not fulfilling my need for intimacy, and I'm going to get back in the community, real people, face-to-face, people around me, small town. Maybe some people are doing that. But I think there are probably more people who are... their personal relationships, face-to-face, friends, family, work, all of that, that is dissociating and becoming alienated at the speed of a rock dropping from a tower, the Tower of Pisa. Whereas, at the same time, social media, the famous, musicians, whatnot, all of that is also becoming alienated. All of that, the distance is increasing, the intimacy is decreasing, but it's falling at the speed of a feather. And so, relatively speaking, I think you've created a dynamic where, for a lot of people, they have a greater level of intimacy with some kind of internet character or figure than they do with people in their own personal life. It's not everybody, but that's a weird phenomenon. It's a growing phenomenon. And it gets intermixed with politics, and I think it has something to do with the 2016 election. And you're also seeing in this uptick in the youth vote, and we'll see what happens with the youth vote here. But young people are becoming so viciously involved in politics, it's incredible. I have never seen anything like it. The extent to which you get these extremely online young people who are living in this bubble of unreality where they think politics is the most important thing in the world and they can't even vote. And for them, it's a thing of life and death. It is a religion. They've reached a state of religiousness. Now, is that a very deep religion, or is that something that's going to disappear in a few years? We'll find out, I guess. We'll find out if the proclivities of young people to live or die over their politics, if that actually comes to fruition, if that actually manifests as something really violent. We can hope not, but time will tell. I never underestimate the effeminization of society at this point. So whenever people do talk about violence, at the same time as we've become dissociated from the famous and alienated from each other, we've also become dissociated and alienated from violence. And the same dynamic in which you get people who are obsessed with K-pop and they're like these Korean names, Sun Yu, Kim Jong, I don't know what the names of these Koreans are. But they get obsessed and they become a stan and they're posting about them and they know everything about them. And I've seen people who are clearly not Korean getting plastic surgery to try to look Korean. That's a rare case. That's an extreme case. I think PewDiePie covered one of those episodes. But, I mean, things like that are happening. And at the same time, I think we're seeing this uptick in rhetoric or opinions or readiness to accept political violence. But is that going to transmit into real political violence? Because these people obsess about K-pop, and is that really going to manifest in anything real? Or is that just is that just a Matrix phenomenon? Are they just trapped in a Matrix? Are they just really just living in a bunch of pink goo up in a, staticky lightning tower in the Matrix, and they're not actually going to do anything? I tend to think that's the way. I tend to think that the more people become dissociated from violence, the more willing they are to say, like, yeah, kill Republicans or something like that, which is not what I'm saying. I'm just saying people are saying this. I'm reporting what other people are saying. Don't be afraid. Don't be worried. But I mean, it is actually something that has resulted in violence. I mean, we look at Rittenhouse, his trial is ongoing, and we look at the guy who got killed by police because he killed a Trump supporter. And, I guess my running prediction has been this is going to develop into Roman levels of street violence. In ancient Rome, you had civil wars. Those civil wars were never started by the common people. They were started by the billionaires of the time, who were also the billionaires of that time because it was not as a mercantile society as we have. To be very wealthy did not mean to be a mercantile banker, but to be very wealthy often involved military conquest. And so they started the wars. But prior to those wars, you saw all kinds of low-level street violence. And so we might see people just being killed, on a daily basis here. But I don't think that will necessarily even manifest in anything significant. It could be very superficial. So love, violence, fame. We'll leave it there for today. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.